thank you so much for joining us today in the first of what is going to be a series of curatorial colloquia and webinar. But first, I want to start by saying that I'm coming to you here from Seattle as I'm Katie Bunn-Marcuse, curator of Northwest Native Art at the Burke Museum. And the Burke Museum stands on the lands of the Coast Salish people, whose ancestors have resided here since time immemorial. Many Indigenous people thrive in this place, alive and strong. And I would like to acknowledge all the communities whose cultural heritage is so far from their traditional territories and to whom we are responsible for their care. So it's wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very good group of participants and presenters. And I want to thank them for joining us, and we're going to introduce them each individually with longer bios in a moment. But for the moment, I'll just welcome Karen Kramer, Jill Yo, Deborah Pappan, so sorry, and Juan Lucero. And Lucero, I need to slow down. I'm going to slow down. Sorry, I'm talking a little fast. And I also want to introduce and thank Bridget Johnson, who's the Assistant Director of the Bill Holmes Center at the Burke Museum. She's going to facilitate and do longer introductions and also introduce our behind the scenes curators, Christina Burke and John Lukovic. But before that, I need to thank the Luce Foundation for their support and encouragement of this set of curatorial colloquium. It was really out of conversations with the Luce Foundation that this whole program got started. So tonight, or today, we have our online curatorial webinar, but this is really a preview and a much more public presentation to what we are hoping will be a wonderful in-person curatorial workshop that will be held at the Burke this fall in September of 2022 for curators who want to learn and share more about their upcoming exhibition challenges. So today's forum is a chance for us to all gather together with a large group of us and listen to some of your questions, listen to these short presentations. And the questions that you all ask will really help us to customize the in-person gathering to fit the curatorial needs of today. So I want to tell you a little bit about this in-person curatorial colloquium in September, because I'm hoping that some of you who are looking for support and professional development will apply to come. So let me tell you a little bit about what that's going to be. It's going to be September 8th through 10th, a 3-day workshop, 2.5-day workshop at the Burke Museum to discuss your challenges in installing Native American art in a Native American art gallery or in larger American art galleries, and to talk with other experienced curators to brainstorm together on best practices in our field. So it's going to be a forum for curators of Native American and First Nations art to discuss issues of ethical exhibition practice, protocols of care, access, and collaboration. Invited curators will do short presentations. Our emerging curators, or those of you who are coming and wanting help, will present case studies on your upcoming exhibitions, and we can all brainstorm together. We're going to have a wonderful team, including Kathleen Ash-Milby of the Portland Art Museum, Heather Ottone of the First Americans Museum, Karen Kramer of Peabody Essex Museum, and others, as well as Native artists and community members who have worked with museums in the past, and we'll have a series of wonderful conversations and hopefully all learn much more about how to improve our curatorial practice. So welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Bridget.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So I'm going to be doing the introductions today, but before I do that, I wanted to just do some brief Zoom protocol. And so as you can see, we'll be recording this event. The program today will start with 4 presentations from 5 curators on their work of installing and reinstalling Native American art galleries. After the presentations, we'll have time for a more general questions and answer session from all of you that will be facilitated by myself and our behind the scenes Q&A team. So please feel free to ask questions anytime during the program using the chat function. The chat will be monitored by curators Christina Burke and John Lukovic. And if you'd prefer to send your questions privately, please feel free to send them directly to Christina Burke or John Lukovic, and they will either answer your questions in the chat or direct them to the appropriate curator or the group during the general Q&A portion of the program. So as mentioned, our behind the scenes team is Christina Burke and John Lukovic. Christina Burke is a curator at the Philbrook Museum of Art in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and works with Native artists, organizations, and communities on such projects as exhibitions, collections research, programming, and publications. And John Lukovic is the Andrew W. Mellon Curator of Native Arts at the Denver Art Museum. And the Denver Art Museum has also recently reinstalled their Native art galleries. So next I'll start with a brief overview of our presenters, and then I'll provide a more full introduction before each of their presentations. First, tonight we'll hear from Deborah Yepapapan, who is a Jemez Pueblo and Korean artist and the Native Community Engagement Coordinator at the Field Museum in Chicago. Then we'll have Karen Kramer, who is the Stuart W. and Elizabeth F. Pratt Curator of Native American and Oceanic Art and Culture and the Director of the Native American Fellowship Program at the Peabody Essex Museum. After Karen, we'll hear from Jill Alberg-Yo, who is the Associate Curator of Native American Art at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, alongside Juan Lucero, who's the Mdewakanton Native Fellow and works in a curatorial capacity at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And then lastly, we'll hear from Katie Bonmarcuse, the Curator of Northwest Native Art and the Director of the Bill Holmes Center for the Study of Northwest Native Art at the Burke Museum, and Assistant Professor of Art History at the University of Washington. So first, I'm gonna get us set up for Deborah's presentation. So our first presenter tonight is Deborah Yepapapan, who is Jemez Pueblo and Korean. Yepapapan is a mother, a wife, a daughter, a visual artist, and the Native Community Engagement Coordinator at the Field Museum, where she played a significant role in the redevelopment of the permanent exhibition of Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories. Both through her artwork and the work at the museum, she is committed to changing inaccurate representations of Native people and advocates for the inclusion of Native people, their voice, and their perspectives. Deborah, alongside her husband, artist Chris Papan, and a small collective of Chicago-based Native artists, recently founded the Center for Native Futures, an arts organization created to support Native artists. In addition, Deborah has served on numerous museum and exhibition advisory committees in Chicago, and nationally, she is a board member of Illinois Humanities and serves on the Cultural Advisory Council for the City of Chicago's Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. She currently lives in her hometown, Chicago, with her husband and their daughter. Please join me in welcoming Deborah Yepapapan.
Thank you, Bridget. Oh, I was expecting to hear like claps or something, like in person in a live audience. But thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Katie, for the invitation to come here and speak and share about the just really enormous project at the Field Museum of renovating the very old Native American Hall, Native American exhibition there. I'm coming to you from Chicago, Chicagoinak, Chicagongi, Chicagong, home to Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Odawa, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Sauk, Fox, Meskwaki, and many other folks that have called and still call Chicago home. So I will get started here. So I will share these images. They're not in any real particular order, and they're just gonna kind of loop through as I share and talk about the project. So they're not in, I mean, they're just, some photos at random. And so, however, I will kind of go back to this one just to kind of give everybody an idea of what the hall did look like prior to the deinstallation and then renovation. So how do I sum up a 4-year project in 10 to 12 minutes? I will try. So the project started in 2018, and that's when it was greenlit. However, the museum was in process of wanting to renovate this hall, knowing how problematic it was. And so, there was some fundraising that went underway beginning around maybe 2015 or 2016 or so. And so then they raised enough funds by 2018. And the first thing that they did was hired me as the community engagement coordinator to help with the project. And I had already been volunteering at the museum for 9 months prior, doing community engagement work, bringing Native people into the museum to, to check out the current exhibition at that time, which was my husband, Chris Papan's art that was intervening in the old hall, but also, just to have conversations with Native people about how we felt about the Field Museum. The Field Museum had been a problematic place for Native people for very long. So once I was hired on, we also brought on an advisory committee of 12 Native advisors. One of those seats went to local Native community and was kind of a rotating seat for our local Native community. And really that first year was spent just, having conversations with the advisory committee, learning about, I think it was really kind of an eye-opening moment for the museum to learn that they weren't this great institution in the eyes of Indian country, in the eyes of Native people, that, there were all these problems that we had with their collecting practices, with their display, the displays and how Native people were represented in the institution. And so I think that whole first year was really just, teaching our non-Native colleagues in the museum about just, how wrong they were in their exhibition and how things needed to change. Also in that first year of 2018, the museum also hired 6 more Native staff members to fill roles in the curatorial team, collections, and conservation. So now we had 7 Native people. Oops, there's some feedback there. We had 7 Native people on staff to just take part in this entire process. And so during this time as well, my role in community engagement is to always prioritize Native people, Native community, to always welcome Native people into the museum, which I was doing at the same time that I had a seat at the table of the, on the exhibition team or the project team. So I had the privilege of meeting with Native people very regularly, and I would have these conversations with them about how we wanted to see the hall change, what they wanted to see in the hall, and having the privilege of having those kinds of conversations, and then also being able to sit at the table, to be at all the meetings with my colleagues on the project team, and to hear the kinds of conversations that they were having. I could advocate for Native people. I could advocate for Native communities and bring their thoughts and opinions to the table, which I felt was just a huge, huge responsibility to have. So with that, my role was manyfold. I, being a part of the concert or the exhibitions team, the project team, I was also at the meetings with all the developers and during the development process, I was part of the curatorial team. I would sit in those meetings. And at the same time, because of those conversations that I would have with Native people, and those visits with Native people also included collections visits, where we would have other conversations about collections care and conservation practices, and how how those practices of the museum needed to be challenged and needed to change. So those were other conversations that, we were having that I was also able to bring to this. It was not an easy process all throughout. It was pretty difficult at times. It was challenging because the museum had its way. They had a system that they had a process, an exhibitions process that they had followed for a while. They thought they had it down pat. But then they realized that they're working with real Native people, with living people, which really changed everything. And everyone really had to learn how to, the museum had to learn how to adapt quickly and how to change their process. I think that was something that was kind of difficult and challenging, was that the fact that they had to change their process, that they had to change at all. And yeah, it was difficult. It was a long journey, but I am so proud of my colleagues in exhibitions because they really took a lot of the time to sit and listen. Listening was a huge part of the process. Having many conversations with many of our collaborators was really important. And just having those moments where they would just listen to what our collaborators wanted. So as the project went on, and after that first year of just kind of discussing and having just conversations and brainstorming, the exhibition developers and curators would kind of take some of these stories from those conversations to create the themes that created the kind of permanent part of the exhibition. And I'm sorry if these slides are going pretty fast. Maybe I'll try to see if I can, actually, I don't know, maybe stop. But so some of the main central themes that we focused on are ancestors connect us to our past, our present, our future. Native people are everywhere. We are deeply connected to the places that we come from. We have the right to govern ourselves. So there's this section on tribal sovereignty or Native sovereignty. There's also a section about the Field Museum's past, because we made sure that the museum had to realize how important it was that they confronted their own past, their own collecting practices, and how awful and harmful they had been to Native communities. And then there's the section called We Speak for Ourselves, which is the section here with this clip from Reservation Dogs featuring Dallas Goldtooth, and many other artists that we ended up working with. And so I felt that, my role has also been critical in that I'm a community member here in Chicago. So I'm very closely tapped into what the community, how the community feels, what the community wants. But I'm also very engaged very broadly across the country as an artist, and having a huge network of other people that I had been able to tap into. So as some of these story ideas were coming about, I would reach out to, or I would suggest certain people that we should work with, that we should bring in as collaborators. Sometimes our advisors suggested people that we should work with. And then once we started to work with certain groups of people, they wanted to then bring in other collaborators. And so that's how we ended up with about 130 collaborators from representing about 105 different tribes all across the country. And of course, we can't include all 570 plus, but with some of the galleries, like this one in particular, Frank Wong's gallery, these are temporary story galleries that will rotate out, which is another kind of new thing for this institution. There's an endowment to ensure that some of these stories will not be on display for the next 70 years, as many of the old cases had been previously. So we're expecting this hall to be living and thriving and ever changing, which means continual engagement with Native people. And engagement is more than just bringing people in to check off a box. Engagement is, creating those relationships where we can have hard discussions, where we could have discussions about the stories that we want to share, that they want to tell. And, I'm a firm believer, and I always advocate that, that institutions and any museum or organization that is working with Native people have a Native community engagement person who is Native and who is well connected to those communities, because it's, I think it does a better service to serve those communities so that we can better tell those stories. So the exhibition is open now. These are just some of the images from the exhibition, and I hope that you all can come back out and see the rest of it. And I'm always happy to meet with people in person too, and share more in person as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And okay, one moment. Our next speaker is Karen Kramer. I'm going to put Karen on spotlight. There we go. And let's see, make sure you can share your screen. Okay. So Karen Kramer is the Stuart W. and Elizabeth F. Pratt Curator of Native American and Oceanic Art and Culture and Director of the Native American Fellowship Program at the Peabody Essex Museum. Her longstanding commitment to presenting and interpreting Indigenous art and culture and her broad experiences working with Native artists and scholars has led to groundbreaking exhibitions and catalogs, including T.C. Cannon at the Edge of America, Native Fashion Now, and Shapeshifting, Transformations in Native American Art. Kramer also co-directs the Peabody Essex Museum's innovative Native American Fellowship Program. Kramer has served as president, vice president, and board member for the Native American Art Studies Association from 2003 to 2015. And Kramer is currently a doctoral student in American Studies at Harvard University, where she focuses on arts-based critiques of settler colonialism, Indigenous arts and methodologies, and contemporary Native art and activism. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'm just gonna share my screen and we'll see how that goes. You'd think that this far into the pandemic, I would be better at this, but I don't do it often enough. So what is happening here? Can you see that? Can somebody tell me?
No,
that
I'm
they
not
can see it?
seeing.
Okay. I think, hold on, I can see it. This is kind of ridiculous. Bridget, can you just do it from your?
Sure. Yeah. I can
Okay,
definitely do that.
thanks.
Let's see, slideshow.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah. There we go. The slideshow.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for your patience. And I want to thank Katie Von Marcuse and the Burke Museum, as well as the Luce Foundation support for hosting this panel. It's really great to be here with my esteemed colleagues. And I want to thank all of you who are tuning in. A couple of brief words about my positionality. I am a settler, scholar, and curator living on ancestral Pawtucket lands in Marblehead, Massachusetts, in a place where there has been much movement and violence between groups across time and space. And as a caretaker of cultural heritage, I acknowledge my responsibilities to the land here, to the Indigenous people who came before me, and to present and future generations. I'm here today to share with you an exciting project that I co-curated at the Peabody Essex Museum, which is our long-term collection installation of Native American and American art that just opened in the middle of March, just a few weeks ago. So I'm going to share a bit with you about our installation, its framework, and how we engaged indigeneity across its 10,000 square feet. Since its founding in 1799, the Peabody Essex Museum has collected and exhibited Native American art and culture, as well as fine and decorative art of colonial America and the United States. Next slide, please. PEM has the oldest ongoing collection of Native American art in the Western Hemisphere. Our collection represents 10,000 years of Indigenous brilliance up to and including the present day. Next slide, please. For more than 2 decades, we have been a leader in collecting and exhibiting contemporary Native American art alongside the historical. And over the past 13 years, we've advanced the museum's commitment to developing the next generation of Native leaders in the cultural heritage sector through our fellowship program. Next slide, please. PEM's important American collection has great strengths in the art histories and material culture of New England. Historical portraiture, furniture, folk art, studio craft, and textiles and clothing represent over 300 years of creative expression in New England. And several years ago, we embarked on this major collection installation project to share gallery space and create interpretive bridges across 2 interrelated but historically separate disciplines, Native American and American art. So let me quickly introduce you to our A team. If you could go to the next slide. I co-curated this installation with Sarah Chassie, who is our curator of American art, and many other folks on this slide helped bring this project into being, including Frank Redner and Rachel Allen in the upper left-hand corner, who were our Native American long-term curatorial and interpretive fellows. And Rachel also became an assistant curator on staff over the course of the project. And we also worked with 15 Native American Summer Fellows between 2018 and 2021, seen here in the bottom row. Next slide, please. The project lifted off in November of 2018 with a convening of Native and non-Native scholars, artists, educators, activists, including Phil Deloria, Rosita Whirl, Marie Watt, Amelia Winger-Bearskin, Dana Bird, Sarah Carter, and others. And in this convening, we thought through ways to integrate the collections, and we assessed the risks and rewards for doing so. We also discussed how to augment and amplify historical and artistic intersections in the collection. And we came away from the convening with a clear direction for the gallery, and we committed to a more robust, integrated presentation of the 2 collections that can advance new ways of seeing and thinking about art in this place we now call America. Next slide, please. We also held conversations with our Native Summer Fellows in workshops to dig deeper into what America and American art mean to them in order to better understand and articulate shared goals for the gallery going forward. Next slide, please. Other museums have recently begun to include Native American art in their American art galleries or Canadian art galleries in very compelling, progressive ways, such as these examples seen here. But Native art often serves as a momentary counterpoint within an American art gallery, which sets up a very uneven dynamic. And next slide, please. So in contrast, our installation provides equal space to the two collections for exploring vibrant expressions of what it means to belong to community, place, family, and nation, and the kind of inverse of that, what does it mean to not belong? This installation includes over 250 works across media, including sculpture, paintings, fashion, decorative arts, photography, archaeology, and media. And artworks span in time from 10,000 years ago to the present. We start the installation with a constellation of objects that look at different notions of belonging to place and community in America. Can you go to the next slide, please? Elizabeth Solomon, Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog elder, holds center court with a video welcoming visitors to the installation in the form of a land acknowledgement, but it's not technically a land acknowledgement. Next slide, please. Following that are artworks that explore the myths and realities of the so-called founding of America in coastal Massachusetts. Next slide, please. This section is called Contact and Crisis, and both of these American paintings represent iconic places where the Pilgrims landed in the place of the Wampanoag people who have sustained the land for millennia. American artists have mythologized and contemplated these places and interactions ever since. And in a kind of call and response are 13 portraits, next slide please, of Aquinnah Wampanoag community members taken by Diné photographer Will Wilson through a collaborative project that we commissioned in 2019. And through this portraiture, as well as an augmented reality experience where one portrait comes to life through video, this body of work underscores the vibrancy and resilience of Wampanoag communities, despite the violent repercussions of colonization that continues. Next slide, please. There are 3 discrete sections of Native American art so that Native art can be understood on its own terms and not always in relation to American art. And this section is called We Are the Land, and it explores Indigenous conceptions of land and place as kin, filled with ancestors, animate and inanimate beings and spirits. Land is the ground beneath our feet and also the waterways and the sky world. Next slide, please. This is a grouping of Native and American art, and it is connected to, this grouping is looking at the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, as well as the witch trials in Salem and in 1692. But it's a grouping that's connected to a larger section of both collections called Heroes and Histories. And this section converges across time and geography to bring forward new ways of looking at the past. So here we're bridging, we're sort of bringing the Pueblo Revolt together with the Salem witch trials, which happened 12 years and 2,000 miles apart. But through an examination of religious persecution and intolerance, these artists have reinterpreted foundational historical moments that continue to penetrate the American consciousness. Next slide, please. Also, part of Heroes and Histories are several objects that investigate America's founding father, George Washington, including Alan Michelson's multimedia installation, Hanadagayas, which translates from Mohawk into English as Town Destroyer, which examines Washington's 1779 devastating seizure of Haudenosaunee homelands and forces the question, what makes a hero, and whose stories have defined America? And finally, are we ready to acknowledge new stories? Next slide, please. The second section of Native American art is called We Are the New Ancestors, and artworks in this section look at how patterns, motifs, color stories, and styles perform the functions of expressing Native identity, politics, ceremony, song, and dance. So I'm going to just skip ahead to one of the last sections of the show. Next slide, please. Called Legacies and Love, which illuminates the bonds between family members and community, as well as the transfer of cultural knowledge and values. Across the installation, we commissioned 30 special labels written by a chorus of voices, including about 15 Native artists, poets, scholars, community members, and activists. And these labels help demonstrate that multiple perspectives can coexist, and that what we don't see in a work of art is sometimes just as important as what we do see. And I want to end by sharing an excerpt from one of these labels written about Wendy Red Star's mother-daughter portrait, which is on the wall on the left on the screen here. And Jennifer Himmelreich she just transitioned out from being our long-term program manager and co-director of our Native American Fellowship Program. But she says, I've recognized in Red Star's powerful but protective gaze and pose a pride in these daughters we raise. Beatrice, Wendy's daughter, holds that which is precious to her, her dolls. She embodies lineages of love and laughter and is emblematic of Native daughters sharing the best of who we are with the next generation. Red Star and Beatrice remind us all we are here. Listen as we tell our stories. If you can go to the next slide, please. So ultimately, the Putnam Gallery, which is called On This Ground, Being and Belonging in America, is a groundbreaking collaboration between two collections historically separated previously that aims to tell more complex stories from broader perspectives, celebrate artistic achievements across time, space, and worldviews, and aims to lift up Indigenous voice and creative expression. And lastly, we aim to create a more expansive definition of American art, which can lead to a more connected, informed, and empathetic future for us all. Thank you so much.
So our next speakers are Jill Alberg-Yo and Juan Lucero. Jill Yo is the Associate Curator of Native American Art at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Alberg-Yo received her PhD from the University of New Mexico, and her dissertation was a focus on the social life of weaving in contemporary Navajo life. Along with Terry Greaves, Alberg-Yo is the co-curator of Hearts of Our People, Native Women Artists. Yo is currently working on another co-curated exhibition that showcases Native photographers working from the 19th century to the present, which will open at MIA in fall 2023. Since her arrival in 2014, Alberg-Yo has co-curated more than a dozen exhibitions and installations with MIA's Native Art Fellows, and Jill seeks new initiatives to expand understanding and new curatorial practices of historical and contemporary Native art. Juan Lucero, who will also be presenting with Jill, was born and raised in New Mexico and is a Twin Cities transplant. He is a member of the Isleta Pueblo tribe, and he has been dedicated to the arts for the past 15 years in many facets. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Museum Studies from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And throughout his career in the arts, he has immersed himself in Native American art with an emphasis on Southwest jewelry and traditional Pueblo pottery. He works as an art storage technician at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, or he worked as an art storage technician at MIA. And today he works at MIA as the Midiwagkan Native Fellow and has worked in a curatorial capacity as well. He curated the show Parska Shada, which opened in the fall of 2021 and runs until this August 2022. He also co-curated the reinstallation of MIA's Native American Galleries with associate curator of Native American art, Jill Alberg-Yo. His happy place is in the depths of museums collections. Please welcome Jill Alberg-Yo and Juan Lucero. And I'll get your presentation up.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, the Burke. Thank you, the Luz Foundation, who continues to just do incredible support of so much important work in Native American art that's happening all around. Very grateful for everything that the Luz is doing. My name is Jill Alberg-Yo. I curate Native art at MIA with Juan.
Hi, and I'm Juan Lucero. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very glad to be able to share what we've been working on in the past couple of years, and very excited for what's to come.
So we're both coming from the continuous homelands of the Dakota people. We just wanted to show, unlike Karen, we didn't have a major reinstallation. What we did is a rotation, and we rotate every year. We try to rotate every year, and we try to do something new each time. And so Juan and I really work together to do some new kinds of things to re-energize the galleries and to rethink the way that our own curatorial practices and how we can kind of change how we do things at MIA, and hopefully provide spaces for multiple voices to be heard. Our three main themes that we're going to talk about are highlighting contemporary art in one gallery, creating new futures, and putting Native knowledges first. So you can go to the next slide.
So for the first time in MIA's history, I guess, in recent history, entire history, we installed an entire gallery full of contemporary Native art from the 1960s on until today. So we are very excited about it. One of the, I think the pushing forces behind us was that get away from that ethnographic feel of traditional museum displays that you're often going to see in museums, and try to make sure that we are highlighting artists that are living today, have lived in the recent recent histories, and just wanting to make sure that that perspective, the contemporary perspective, is actually shared.
Yeah, so, this is the first gallery that you go into for the Native American galleries, if you go in kind of the conventional way. And like Juan said, we really wanted to show contemporary art for the first time all at once. Usually we have this contemporary and historic work that are paired together, but we just want to have one space of just contemporary work. It was really important for us to also include a whole range of art, because that is the range of art is Native art, right? We didn't want to just have works on paper, paintings. We wanted ceramics, we wanted jewelry, we wanted adornment, we wanted paintings, we wanted multimedia works to be present, because that is fundamentally what Native art is. And it doesn't fit into how the Western canon works, but it fits totally into the Native art canons. So if you could go to the next slide. So here you'll see some recent works. A lot of these were recent acquisitions, a work by Christy Belcourt that was a commission made specifically for MIA. These are all, nearly every being on the painting is on the endangered, threatened, or near extinction in the upper Midwest. Then the wonderful portrait by Avis Charley, who was, this was the first painting by a Dakota person in our collection, and it was beautiful. One of the things we did is ask artists to write labels whenever we could, and she said, I wanted to create a work of art here that when I never got to see myself in when I would go to MIA or I'd go to museums, and I wanted to have an image of a woman sitting on a bench. It's an homage to T.C. Cannon as well, but I wanted to create these works of art for younger women to see. And then Juan, you want to talk about the other?
And just to add a lot more splash of color and vibrancy to the galleries, one of the things that I noticed in the rotation in these galleries is that with the contemporary artwork being displayed and created by living artists, is that there's a lot more liveliness into the galleries. There's a lot more life that is brought out of the galleries, and I think that's a great reflection of the spirit that Native artists put into their work. So putting this live spirit and this live from live artists is one of the things that really brings everything together and brings everything in a much brighter vision for us.
You can go to the next slide, please. Do you want to go?
I'll let you start this one.
So we knew that this next gallery is Gallery 260. Oh, and I meant to note that you'll see the QR codes at the bottom of the text panels, and those are actually longer conversations between Juan and I that they taped us, where we would talk about these, where it couldn't fit in 130 words, but it was very conversational between both of us, giving different perspectives on these important issues. So creating new futures, it was really important, as Deborah pointed out, to recognize what is of our past and to be aware of what we need to unravel and what truths we need to talk about in museum settings, what the materials that we have, the way in which things were collected, the ways in which things were interpreted, these beautiful works of art, and to be self-reflective in that. And I'll just offer my quote that you see here. As a curator with many years of experience working in the field of Native art, this critical lens and self-reflection is necessary in my own journey. It's important to question my own positionality at the museum, including my role as a non-Native curator, the biases I learned through my Western academic training, and the curatorial decisions that I have made and that I will make. And as Juan says, it's the process of unlearning. You know, as a curator who's been trained academically, there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done. And this was part of that process.
Yeah, so in this gallery, I think what I really wanted to do and what we really wanted to do was bring forth new narratives, or not necessarily new narratives, but narratives that are often unheard unheard in museums. It's the culturally educated, and what I guess you could call it, is being immersed within your culture. So those stories from Native communities that are often not shared. So that's what we wanted to bring to light, and we wanted to bring to the forefront of these different teachings, different stories, different narratives that are often kind of silenced to traditional academia. So often what I wanted to do is growing up, before I was in museums, growing up and going to museums, I would visit these exhibits that were showing Pueblo people and Pueblo communities how they once lived. And it always had me questioning whether or not I myself was living in the proper Pueblo manner, because I wasn't dressed or looked like, or even doing the things that Pueblo were depicted doing in these exhibits. So one of the things I always wanted to do is create something that was going to show what Pueblo people are doing now and share those stories of what's happening from a true Pueblo perspective, not an academic Pueblo perspective of telling people what Pueblo people are doing, but telling people what I'm doing and what our people are doing. So that's really what I wanted to do. But also in doing that, I really, being in collections, I listen and I talk to the objects themselves, and I kind of pull from their spirit and understand what they want to do, and be so I'm able to tell the stories from their perspective as well.
Next slide.
And in doing so, one of these are probably three of my favorite cases that we have in the galleries here. The top left-hand corner is a painting by Polito Velarde, and then the pieces of pottery beneath is Lucy Lewis and potter Franklin Peters from Acoma Pueblo. Each of these paintings or each of these works are actually created in a contemporary manner from traditional roots. So that's one of the stories we actually wanted to share, that there's it's not necessary to continue collecting these ancient materials from these ancient places. We have people that are creating these works today. We have people that are sharing these same stories, because we have not changed our stories. Our oral histories have never changed. So that's one thing I really wanted to focus on in telling those stories and bringing those practices to light. Beneath that is going to be, it's kind of funny, if there's any jewelers on here, or if anybody that's really interested in Native American jewelry or Southwest jewelry in particular, there's always been a debate, and this is one of those stories, those funny like narratives that we share in the Southwest, or you'll hear in the Southwest, is that there's always this long battle of who started doing silversmithing first, or who's the better silversmiths, and it's always between the Dene people and the Zuni people. So on this display is actually that the concho belts are all Dene creators, and beneath that are the squash blossoms created by Zuni people. And in between that, holding that debate and just being the moderator for the debate is the Kashari, which is a spiritual being in Pueblo culture, and he's kind of hoping to try to help them figure this debate out. So that's one of the fun things I was able to do, is kind of have that spirit of Pueblo people and the spirit of like the being itself be able to tell this story and be able to handle this debate. And the next photo you see here is two sculptural forms by Chase Earls, and it's based again on that ancient practice of telling those contemporary stories, telling our histories how we want to be able to tell them, and putting that church on top of the imperial walker, the is just the perfect way of being able to tell those colonial histories from an indigenous perspective in the Southwest or throughout America. So that's just, and we wanted to highlight works like this kind of in an empty case by themselves, so they're able to just shine on their own.
Next slide, please. Something that we've talked about in this session, I mean, there's a long history of these divides, you know, fine art versus craft, things like traditional versus contemporary, and that those often aren't useful, and those are often imposed by the outside onto Native artists and Native art and Native art history. So we wanted to kind of flip the script instead and put Native knowledge and Native knowledges, I want to say that is plural, first. And by doing that, we asked a lot of people to contribute to write their own labels, and then being able to include historic and contemporary work together, but also to understand that these are always connected to ways and being in the world, and and this art is always a part of something bigger.
And I think the thing, what Jill said about recruiting artists and recruiting community members to be able to talk about their work themselves is the most powerful thing we could have done, I think, because in doing that, we give power back to those communities, we give power back to the work itself, and it closes the door from any misinterpretations that may happen
Mhm.
and that have historically happened for a lot of these works. Next slide.
So we are an encyclopedic museum, and we, we do showcase historic and contemporary works. But it was really important for us to think about how we can display things, to talk about broader issues that many of our visitors are unaware of. And we did this through the Chief Blanket and Lakota aesthetics. There was the Chief Blanket is on your right. It's beautifully unrestored. It is on a loan from a New York collection, and most of you know there's very few Chief Blankets, first phase Chief Blankets. There's maybe 20 in the world that we know of. But these blankets were made for trade. They were made for, they're called Chief Blankets because for many reasons, they were brought and they were made for trade to Cheyenne, Lakota, Ute, Shoshone, people of great prestige. I mean, they were the couture of the 19th century. And then in this instance, you'll see on the left is a beautiful dentalium shell dress, and dentalium shell came from the West Coast. So all the way, thousands of miles away from the West Coast. So here is, and there is a Lakota woman in the center, and we'll talk more about her in a later slide, but there is a woman who is creating something, a Navajo Chief Blanket, dentalium shells, beautiful. You'll see the front ribbon that you see in the dentalium dress. She's wearing a dress, she's wrapped in a Chief Blanket, and it becomes a distinctly Lakota aesthetic based on these vast trade networks that have existed for millennia. And that was something really important. So we tried to tell these stories in different ways using the historic work, so that we could tell these stories of vast trade networks, of couture, of valuables going up and down, north and south, east and west. And what's also really beautiful too, I don't know if you can see, but the reflection on the left is Deani Whitehawk's piece, which is on view, and that is a painting that is an abstraction of thousands of painted porcupine quills, very much similar fashion to the dentalium shell design, that beautiful horizontal work that she has. And also a ledger in the middle where individual depicts a Chief Blanket, a chief actually wearing a Chief Blanket. Next slide, please. Next slide.
So one of the things we wanted to do is actually go over the, how do I say this? I grew up in New Mexico. So we didn't get a lot of the history that I didn't learn about the Dakota history until I actually moved to Minnesota in 2013. I am now the father of 3 little descendants of the exiled, which are the Dakota people who have been exiled from the Minnesota area. So in doing so, I wanted to tell those true histories and tell those stories from those perspectives that I respect so much in this area. I want to tell the stories from a very genuine place that I'm not able to say so on my own. So I wanted to immerse myself within the Dakota community and be able to share their stories for them. So I'm trying to, through this, like this label here, I was very taken aback in reading the initial label that was on there, and it talked very much so from the historical, like academic perspective, where it talked about how there was an uprising, but the uprising was caused because of both sides causing these turmoils amongst each other. But the true history of it is much deeper than that. And the true history is much harder for our Dakota communities to be able to share. So I wanted to make that accurate. I wanted to make it unforgiving to the descendants of the colonizers, I guess you could say. I wanted it to be able to bring these truths to light so they're able to understand why the Dakota people are where they are in this country and in this region. I don't necessarily want to read the label itself. I want everybody to be able to read it and understand about this. But yeah, I really wanted to share these stories for my children themselves, my children and the community that I actually work really hard with. And I really hope people actually read these labels so they understand these histories.
Next slide. And about those labels, like I even, when you come into art museums, you learn that there's kind of like art speak and there's art museum speak and there's labels, and it becomes this very unified voice. And it's unsigned and it's very authoritative, and it's and that just becomes the norm of how things operate. So what Juan and I wanted to do is interrogate those labels that were existing. And I'll be honest, some of those labels I wrote before, like 7 years ago, and they sounded so clinical and it sounded so impersonal. And I would look at a bag that was made and a description of this bag, and it made it seem like it wasn't alive. It made it seem like it didn't have potency, and it does have potency. And so being able to have those critiques and being transparent about those critiques, so we would have the previous label and then we would have our own response to that label, and we would sign those responses, that this is coming from Juan's perspective, this is coming from my perspective. And then when we had artists, that was coming from their perspectives. But just to close, there's this beautiful photo, as you saw, and I love this photo for many reasons. It's taken from a Wild West show in Earl's Court in England. So it shows the cosmopolitan nature of Lakota people. Here's this woman who's in England, dressed in her finest. But I felt really, really uncomfortable because I didn't know who she was. So whenever you have a question about finding out who a Lakota person might be in the past, you just call Christina Burke, who is who is on this panel right now. And within about 5 hours, we were able to locate her name, find her name, and her name is Kanji Maza Iron Crow, Ellen Nonek. And as Juan has pointed out, it was really important for us to include her Lakota name in this label. And it's our hope that we're going to be able to find her descendants and let them know that this image is at MIA. So thank you all.
Thank you. I'm just gonna get situated and we'll move on to Katie's presentation. Okay. So thank you, Jill and Juan. And next we have our final presenter, Katie Bunn-Marcuse. And let's make sure I'm okay. So Catherine Benmark-Hughes is the curator of Northwest Native Art and the director of the Bill Holmes Center for the Study of Northwest Native Art at the Burke Museum and associate professor of art history at the University of Washington. Her most recent book is the volume Unsettling Native Art Histories on the Northwest Coast, edited with Aldona Janitis, published by University of Washington Press. Her other publications focus on the indigenization of European American imagery, 19th century Northwest Coast jewelry and other body adornment, and the filmic history of the Kwakwaka'wakw as well. In her role as curator, she collaborates with First Nations communities and artists to identify research priorities and to activate the Burke Museum's holdings in ways that are responsive to cultural revitalization efforts. Please join me in welcoming Katie Benmark-Hughes.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Is that correct, Bridget?
Yes,
Okay.
you're good.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you, everyone. This is the last presentation. Then I hope that we'll have some more time for questions, or that you're directing some questions to Christina and John. I certainly have all kinds of things I'd love to discuss with all of our other presenters. I'll just tell you a brief story about planning the Northwest Native Art Gallery in the Burke Museum. And we keep saying the new Burke Museum, although we opened in 2019, so that's been a while, but it feels still very new, particularly after being closed during the pandemic. So the Burke was founded in 1885 and is responsible for Washington's collections of natural history and cultural heritage, and for the knowledge that makes them meaningful. They tell us there are 18 million collections in the Burke in zoology, geology, and the cultural collections. When we were thinking about the new Burke Museum, we wanted to turn the museum inside out. We wanted people to understand that we are a very active research museum, a place where Indigenous communities come together, scientists, natural history, all of that. We wanted people to see through the Burke, to see into the labs, into the collection spaces, and not think the museum only exists as those visitor galleries that most of us experience in museums. So in 2016, we broke ground on the new building and started construction, and 3 years of moving collections. And in 2019, we said goodbye to the old building. So for 3 years, we packed and we packed and we packed. These are the malacology collections. We packed dinosaurs and whales and all of the cultural collections. And so the question was, how are we going to go from our vision to the reality? How are we going to fill that empty box in a new way and get to, in this case, for me, the new Northwest Native Art Gallery? So the Burke departs from typical museum models. We want the visitor to understand that galleries are really integrated with visible workspaces, with labs, with interacting learning spaces. So the Northwest Native Art Gallery, and this is the western wall of the gallery, you can see that it highlights artistic and cultural research, and you can also look into our storage. The cultural collections have 50,000 pieces from across the globe, about 12,000 from the Northwest Coast. And on any given day, you might look in there and see artists visiting, community members. The compactors move back and forth in those open windows. So you might look down the Bentwood box aisle, you might look down an aisle with masks or all kinds of other things from just around the world, bowls and ladles and dresses and everything. And additionally, we see contemporary Northwest Coast art, Alison Bremner's take on the iconic Fremont troll in Seattle. So this is a troll that sits under one of our local bridges with a Volkswagen Bug in his hand. And here we can see it in Alison's new rendition. So as you walk down the hall in the Northwest Native Art Gallery, down from the front door of the museum, you look down the hall and your eye is drawn first to this welcome figure from Neah Bay, originally from the Nuu-chah-nulth territories on Vancouver Island. Then you walk under the 35-foot Kwakwaka'wakw canoe, which was purchased in 1896 by Numgee's chief, well, purchased by Mrs. Burke from Numgee's chief, Jonathan Wannock. he was taking his people down to Puyallup to pick hops, and she purchased his canoe, and I guess they took the steamer home. And as you go all the way to the very far end of the gallery, you come across the last of the permanent pieces in the gallery, which are Nathan and Stephen Jackson's Tlingit house posts, which were commissioned by the Burke to replace the older Cott's grizzly bear posts when those were returned to the Tequity clan in 2001. The original old post, which you see in this black and white photo, was stolen by the Harriman expedition. And so in 2001, the Burke Museum returned that to the tribe, to the clan, and commissioned these new posts by Nathan and Stephen Jackson. So those are the permanent pieces in the collection in the gallery. But what I wanted to tell you about is the installation that was co-curated by 6 women artists from across the coast. And what I want to recognize before we go into that is that all of the work that we do at the Burke in the Bill Holmes Center, but also broadly in our cultural collections, is very much impacted by the legacy of Bill Holm. When he was a curator here, he always had an open door policy. If someone was interested in model canoes or baskets or woven robes, he'd say, well, come on in, let's go in the back and take a look. And so he really set this example of sharing and openness and respect that I learned from him, that Robin Wright, who was my advisor and previous curator here at the Burke, that learned from him. And so Robin Wright founded the Bill Holmes Center for the Study of Northwest Native Art in 2003. And this, the center runs a grant program, and it's founded on this idea of access. Our grants encourage artists and scholars to spend time in the collections and to learn from the historic pieces that we have here. So the Northwest Native Art Gallery's curatorial strategy really echoes the work that we do at the Bill Holmes Center. It's about stepping back and letting artists and community members find meaning and then share that meaning in the ways that they find the most appropriate. So I know from over the years that the greatest amount of learning comes from when community members come and visit and spend time in collections. They are the ones who have the knowledge about the technologies, about the cultural importance, about all of the new insights and understandings of knowing why these collections are important and how they should be shared with the public. So one of the ways that I was thinking about how do I put together a collaborative curatorial team, I thought that it needed to be people who already knew and trusted the museum, or knew me or knew the museum and trusted that. So building, and these relationships built out of earlier projects that were small visits, small projects. And that really led into the wonderful team that, that came together and did this incredibly productive work in a short 2-year time span. So I invited 6 artists from across the greater Northwest Alaska, who are from different parts of the coast. They are different ages, they work in different media, and they were at different moments in their career paths. So the artists are Allison Bremner, Tlingit multimedia artist, Evelyn Vanderhoop, Haida Weaver, Luann Neal, Kwakwaka'wakw multimedia artist, Betty Pasco, Suquamish weaver, basket maker and textiles, and Ryan Fedderson, Okanagan and Lakes, who is also multimedia, very much installation-based artist, and Pat Courtney Gold, Wasco from the Columbia River, also a weaver. And so they came together, and we asked these 6 women artists to be co-curators for a number of reasons. They're talented artists in their own right, but they're also dedicated historians of the artistic practices from their community. So the installation's not an exhibit of women's artwork, it just has female curators. And they are intensely knowledgeable about the whole range of artwork made by both men and women from their communities. And so this is rare, this female curatorial team. It's very rare on the Northwest coast, where really the vast amount of interpretation of the art has been produced by and privileged the work of men over the last century. And one of the other reasons I hope this group of women would work well is that they were already familiar with the Burke collections. They'd each spent time either on Bill Holmes Center grants or independently studying the collections. So they had a head start and weren't entirely overwhelmed from picking from the 12,000 pieces from their collections. So we knew we were building a new museum from scratch. I didn't want entirely new to build new relationships and new experiences. We needed to build on what we already had in place. And eventually we will also be inviting new curators into that space with us. So in May of 2017, the group convened for the first time, and we discussed what their experiences had been with other museums, what we should bring into our process, what we should leave out of our process. And the question that we came to as a group was to ask, what would you like the public to know about your artistic heritage or the artistic heritage of your community? And so we wanted to focus on how the arts are a communicator and a carrier of history and identity. And we focused on some key ideas. Artwork is a language, artwork communicates, knowledge about the past is embedded in the technology, skill, aesthetics, and functions of cultural belongings. And so in the following months, each of the co-curators returned to the museum to examine the collections and to make their final selection of artworks. They also wrote all of the text expressing the message that they wanted to convey to museum visitors. And each artist took a slightly different path on interpreting that question of artistic heritage and what they wanted to share with the public. So Betty Pascoe was really looking at images, at artworks that had a lot of meaningful iconography and motifs, and bringing those together to focus on stories and generations of knowledge. And then in addition, we asked each co-curator to create a new piece. We commissioned a new piece that they made to be in conversation with the rest of the artworks that they chose for their section of the exhibit. And so Betty Pascoe is one of my favorites. She took all of those imagery from the various artworks that she selected, and then she wove a brand new weaving, which really puts all of this iconography into conversation with each other. Luann Neal, for instance, she wanted to focus on children, how important children are to community. And so she looked through the collections and found dolls and little baby sweaters, cradles, baskets, all of these things that are meant for the children and community. And so each curator chose their own theme, selected the artworks that would go on display. They wrote the introductory text and all the other texts for their collection. And so when you come into the gallery, you see these permanent pieces, you can see the visible storage on your left, and then you can see this installation put together by these 6 women from across the coast. And while it's been up 3 years, it doesn't really feel that long, but soon we will be inviting other people to come in sections, replacing one part of this gallery after the next. And then the final bit I just wanted to share with you is that as you come through the gallery and you turn back around, you see into an artist studio that's built into the end of the gallery. It's been a big success. We didn't know what it would be like. We worried it would have that fishbowl people on display feeling, but the artists have really taken to it. They've been calling up and asking to come and spend time in the galleries. And so we have had artists, not just from the Northwest Coast collections, but from our other Arctic, North American, Oceanic, Asian collections coming, and those communities coming and sharing their artworks in the artist studio. And that's been probably the most rewarding part of this, is to really, the whole effect I feel is with the historical pieces and the contemporary pieces and the communities who are coming to visit and working, and you can see into the workrooms or working in the studio. It really makes the Burke feel like a living place where everybody is coming together to talk about the artistic heritage in their communities and just the constant power of Indigenous knowledge. So that's the end of my show. Thank you, everybody. And I'm happy to turn it over to questions. Let me turn this off. We can spotlight all of our guests today. And then please, do we have questions from the audience or ones that Christina or John wanted to bring forward? I see that Steve Russell asked Deborah, during the same period, the Art Institute of Chicago, which I realize is a different institution, ran into severe headwinds with their planned Mimbres exhibition. Did that experience have impact on the process you were going through?
Yeah, I was actually on the advisory committee for that exhibition as well. They brought us in after they had planned that exhibition for 2 years without any input or collaboration with Pueblo people. But they brought us in just months before they were going to open the exhibition to basically, ask us to check the box for them. By that time, I think we were about maybe a year and a half or 2 years into our exhibition process at the Field Museum. And I felt like the Field Museum, even with all the problems we still had at that time, that we were light years ahead of the Art Institute of Chicago in our process, in how early on we brought in Native community, and how early on we brought Native collaborators through our advisors to have conversations and to learn before even moving forward, with our development. So yeah, it was a huge disappointment to, and we told them, in that advisory committee meeting, we said that you should not go forward with the show, but they didn't listen. And so that was another difference between that project and ours, where a lot of times advisory committees are brought in and not always listened to. You can take the advice or not, right? But with the Field Museum, I think they really did try very hard to listen to everything that our advisors and collaborators were bringing, and really try to honor everything that people were sharing, which is a huge difference from the Art Institute of Chicago, which I feel still has a long way to go.
This is John. I have a question, actually, Deborah. This is something that comes up a lot in like what we're doing and trying to figure out how to budget for it. But you mentioned how you had a core group of advisors or collaborators on your project, and they would bring more people in and more people in, and you suddenly have a lot of people to work with. One of the things we're trying to do is to fairly compensate people who contribute their intellectual knowledge into the projects that we're working on. And that's honestly, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's one of the things that scares me, is that like, I want to be able to bring in more people, but at some point, we don't have a budget to support something like that. Do you have any advice on how you navigated that kind of situation?
Ooh, yeah, I wasn't really on the budget side of things, but just from my observations and what I've overheard from my colleagues is that, I mean, yes, we had our budget in the beginning. All the advisors, they all got paid every year that they were part of the project. And we did have to extend the project out 6 months because we had to delay the opening. But yes, and it was a scary thing as more people were brought in, and we wanted to make sure that everyone was compensated. But I mean, compensation all across the board varied depending on, like the amount of participation. We had some collaborators that were, they were basically co-curators. We had others that, we purchased works from, we commissioned works from, and then they became, they shared their story about their pieces. And so it just depended, I think, on the limit of participation as well. But I think, the Field Museum, they were always like, you guys have a lot of money, you can move things around. And so they were able to find some money in other, parts of the museum that they could move over to help support. But then the pandemic really had a huge impact as well, because then we weren't paying for it. We didn't have to pay or worry about travel or accommodations to bring people in. So a lot of our meetings ended up happening over Zoom. So there was, over 2 years of not having to travel people. So I think some of that money's kind of shifted over to compensation.
Great. We don't have any more questions yet in the chat. I had another question. I guess this is for, Jill
John,
and well, yeah.
Can I just follow up on that?
Oh, yeah, please do. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm so glad you brought this up because it's the kind of thing that, we're not supposed to talk about money. And really, this webinar and our in-person one is for these kinds of questions, right? That let's talk about all the things that we, sort of don't talk about or need help from our colleagues. And I have found that the more that you are talking about budgets and then, you do a collaborative project, and if you can keep track of how many people you worked with and all the various levels that people got paid at, it really is people see how successful the project is, and then it can help you to build the budget the next time out. Because in the past, right, you get to the end and you'd say, well, we need money for this kind of consultation or that, and they'd say, no, it's all in mounts, or it's all in advertising, or it's all in whatever it was. And when we can start early, that makes a huge difference. But that's the kind of thing I'd love to discuss with all of you at more level of detail. Who gets paid, how do you pay it, how do you fund it? And as you said, Deborah, those Zoom meetings really helped us move our budgets around and get a lot more done.
Great. So I have another question. I'm learning a ton from this myself, so thank you all. But Jill and Katie, you kind of both touched on this a little bit about being very transparent, or even Deborah, when you were talking about kind of taking an inner look at yourself, or meaning the institution, and how we're communicating that out through label copy, being self-reflective in this. That's something that Dakota and I really battled with in our planning for our gallery. And we ultimately got advice from our advisory council not to do that, primarily because we only have so much space for labels in our gallery. And anytime we're talking about ourselves, we're taking away an opportunity to talk about the artists or the communities or, the artwork or something like that. So we took kind of the uncomfortable position of just not doing that, but we fully recognize the validity of it and the importance of being transparent and talking about these things so the public understands about the challenges and the negative histories of the past, but and how we can move forward in a healthy way. But again, it's kind of balancing that, you can only tell so many stories. So which stories do you tell? Do you have any experience from your thought process as you're going through that help you decide one way or the other?
I think for us, it's your balance is the great point. We didn't do it in every label. We were careful about not of suffocating other people's perspectives and the important stories, and not it being about us. And but yet we found that it was necessary to position ourselves and to position the museum and to tell those truths in spots. So it's all, for us, it was all about balance. We didn't do it all over, but we did it in key places where we thought that it might have an impact for our viewers.
And a lot of it, I think, was works that are often misinterpreted, and that those are something we've heard through the grapevine of the museum, that those are the works that need to be have a clearer sense of a narrative, clearer narrative.
Yeah,
That's a really, I'm sorry, I was just saying really quick, that's a really good point, Juan, and really a crucial reason to work with community community connectors and learning and engagement staff or education staff on understanding how people use the space, how and maybe the preconceptions that they have of what they're reading or what they're seeing or what they bring into the conversation in order to identify what you can do through label copy to kind of change those perspectives. And I'm sorry, Deborah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. I was going to say that, that definitely was a topic of discussion too, during our process. Because yes, the Field Museum, over 100 and almost 130 years old, with, horrible collecting practices very early on and for a very long time, that we knew that we had to say something. We had to implicate the museum in that. And I think you know, and this is why it's so important to engage and really listen to the communities that you're working with, because had our communities or our collaborators, had our advisors said, no, we don't want to talk about that in this because it's going to take up too much space, then maybe we would have listened to that and also made that decision. But our advisors really did, they really did push for that story to be told. And we all felt that that was the right thing. Whether we wanted, I mean, we didn't want it to take too much space in the whole hall either, because you're right, like, you know, as much space as possible to Native voices was important. But also realizing too that it wasn't just Native American communities that were harmed by the Field Museum. There were almost every other culture in the world was harmed by the Field Museum in their collecting practices. So maybe, you know, there could still be that, you know, that this could be a continuing story, or, you know, a display that could happen somewhere else in the museum to address, you know, and you know, apply to all the other cultures that are represented there as well.
At the Burke, as you enter the lobby and start down the hall, well, I showed you down the hall to the Northwest Native Art Gallery, but before you get there, there's actually an entire other cultural gallery that's called Culture is Living, that is represents the material heritage from communities across the globe. And Holly Barker and Sven Hawkinson were the curators for that. And they started that with quite a forceful text that in bold letters talks about the colonial damage that museums have done, and then sets out a sort of commitment by the Burke to say, we recognize we were a part of this history, and here is our commitment to changing that and to acting in different ways now. And so we don't talk about it a lot, but it's very bold at the beginning of that entrance to our cultural floor.
Looks like there's some conversation about QR codes. You know, I think we're all trying to collect data on how they're being used now. I mentioned in the chat how we used them a decade ago and nobody used them. They were kind of a failed experiment, and you know, but at that time, QR codes were not embedded in the cameras of our smartphones, which they are now. So we're very encouraged in how people are now using it. And I just can't wait for enough data to be generated so we can really tell how people are accessing the information using QR codes.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that because, of course, like all of us, I want people to have, you know, oodles and oodles of more information than we could possibly put in the galleries. And I love the idea that and I don't know what yours looks like, but I'm assuming it goes to a discussion, which is a video of you having a conversation. And, you know, that's so engaging, and that's the best place. I would love for people to go and hear more directly from artists or see, you know, the process of making this piece. But there was an interesting discussion at our museum about less and less technology, not to have a moment in the gallery that encourages people to sort of engage with the technology. So I was, you know, of two minds. I really wanted people to be able to go out and gather so much more information. So I'm curious to see what the next iterations of that will be as well. Yeah, Deborah.
Yeah, I was gonna, so the new hall we have so many media interactives all throughout. So because, you know, we couldn't, there's only so much you could put on a text label, right? And so we are using these media interactives to share stories, to share videos. You hear voices, you see the people that, you know, that have collaborated on that display. And so there's so much more information on those, and people are using them. So from our Native community opening weekend and the opening weekend, I mean, people are just, you know, I mean, we use our phones, right, for everything. We have our phones, and the media interactives, the railings are just our phones, like, you know, in this way. And so people are used to just like touching and looking, and we got a lot of really positive responses from people using those and loving the information that they're getting from them.
I can jump in for a minute. my institution, Philbrook Museum of Art, which is within the boundaries of Muskogee Creek Nation here in northeastern Oklahoma, we've been addressing both of these kinds of issues, kind of institutional reckoning and deep history that goes back before the white oil baron Wade Phillips and his wife Genevieve built their home that would become a museum, but also low tech. So we have an entire gallery designated to a broad timeline of the history of this place. That is where one of the places where we have a land acknowledgement that we've worked on for many years, but we also have information about the Muskogee Creek Alati, whose land this was, Lena Jefferson, and information about her descendants, and we're in contact with her descendants as well. But we have Post-it notes, they're color-coded Post-it notes that we invite visitors to ask questions, make comments. Sometimes there are conversations between visitors, and one visitor will answer another's question or ask another question. And then about once a week, the staff goes down there to collect those Post-it notes, and we answer in another color Post-it note to give an institutional response or asking more prompts and more questions. And we don't have a focused endpoint of this project, but we are documenting these questions, these areas of interest, and we're using that information, again, very low tech, but to inform as we reinstall and develop new exhibitions, new programs, et cetera. So we're getting information from across the community, but also helping to zero in on some things that visitors in general are focused on, and maybe thinking about where are there places where we really do need to have a more formal community committee to address various issues.
Christina, I love that because you're hitting on ways that you can get at results, even if you don't have a budget, or even if you hadn't planned to have a consulting group or an advisory board or whatever. You can always come up with some way to get at this. It sounds like yours was very deliberate, but this would be a strategy for people who are in museums that want to make these changes, but the institution is not yet, helping them with budgets and other things like this. So we've brought up so many wonderful topics, and we will have another online webinar, I think, next year. We are definitely having our in-person curatorial colloquium in September. We'll have some wonderful curators working with us at that time. And I hope that anyone here who is a curator and wants to join this network and come and have conversations with us will send us your information, and we'll get you more information on the curatorial in-person colloquia. So thank you, everyone. Today, it's been wonderful to have you here, and I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I have learned a whole lot. So thank you.